Hi there, welcome to another online sociology lesson. We are going to continue today with looking at Rapoport and Rapoport, so the sociologists who are looking at family diversity. Remember, we were using the acronym CLOGS to explain the 5 different types of family diversity that they studied. Remember, these guys were the first sociologists in the UK to really properly study family diversity in all of its different forms. And last lesson, we started by looking at cultural diversity, the idea that different people's cultures impact on their beliefs about what makes a normal or a healthy or a kind of desirable family structure, and how different cultures experience family differently. So we looked at the examples of families in South Asian cultures where elders and older relatives are really highly regarded and highly respected, and you'll often see them living in an extended family with adult children in later life, and they're cared for within the family home. And you can kind of contrast that to the UK, whereby older relatives are still valued but maybe not to such a high degree, and a lot of families find themselves hundreds of miles away from older relatives, maybe who've been put into a care home rather than being cared for in the family home. So one really simple cultural difference of how we view older people has a really big impact on the structure of the family unit. So today we're going to look at LOGS, so life course, organisational, generational and social class diversity. We're going to look at the next 4 aspects of Rapoport and Rapoport's research, and these 4 should all take us in total about an hour to complete, because they're not too long. Certainly in comparison to cultural diversity. So let's crack on. Life course diversity is our first one today. If you can write this subtitle, and I'm going to explain it using some pictures, and I'm going to set you a little task on this as well before we move on to the next one. So the idea of life course diversity is basically, over the course of my life or your life or anybody's life, we will experience a number of different family types. So you might be born into a nuclear family, and then your parents might separate and they might become a lone parent family, and then you might move out and go to university and you live in a household. Remember, it's not a family unit, it's just a household of friends. And then you might meet somebody and move in with them, and then you might get married and have children of your own, and then becomes a nuclear family. You know, it's a constant cycle of existence, and that sounds very similar to the life cycle that I've gone through at this point in my life. I was born into a nuclear family. That's me as a little lad. My parents then separated, and that led to a lone parent family. So that's me, my dad and my brother. Me with some very questionable fashion choices there on the left hand side. I think they were women's jeans, which I was really proud of back in the day, but not so much now. I then went to uni and lived with my mates. There's me in the middle, and that's a household, obviously not a family, and we were all living together and had a great time. And then I got married, and so I've become a nuclear family. I've not got any children of my own, but I'm in a marriage with my wife. And then our parents, my parents got back together, and her parents have always been together, and they both became what's called an empty nest family. So basically, when adult children leave the family home, the parents are left behind. It's kind of an empty nest, because they've been spending 18 years, 19 years looking after these kids, and then they go and fly the nest elsewhere, and the parents are left behind. So throughout my life cycle, I've lived in 3 or 4 different kind of family environments or households as well. We might then have children. We might then I don't know, one of our older relatives might move in with us, and that then makes us an extended family, and so on and so forth. Okay, it is largely impossible, really, for anybody to stay within the same family setup their entire life unless you live with your parents until you die. People are going to move out of their parents' household and into a different type of household. So life cycle and life courses influence family types, that over time your family type will change based on the stage of life that you're in. And it's really important to notice that interests and leisure activities also differ depending on the stage of family life. So if you go back to the start, me as a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, however old I was there, I was into Thomas the Tank Engine and Cheerios. That's pretty much what I lived for as a 3-year-old. I then went to uni, and I can't say that my interests remained the same. I don't think I was hooked on Thomas the Tank Engine at uni. I was into sports and going out with my friends and, you know, all other stuff that I probably shouldn't talk about on a YouTube lesson. It's different. Your interests and your activities differ depending on the stage of life that you're in. Now I'm with my wife, my interests and activities are slightly different again. I've gotten a little bit older, a little bit more sensible, a little bit more mature, and my interests are different even now. Okay, so throughout your whole life, your family type changes, but also the sort of interests and activities that you are involved in based on that family type also change over life cycle as well. So I've put up on Show My Homework, I've put a sheet which is called Life Course Diversity. You will see this woman, or this girl who grows into a woman, going through various different family types. I would like you to explain very briefly for each one what has happened to the family type in the previous image to make it the next one. So what happened between image 1 and image 2 to make it go from a nuclear family to a lone parent family? What happened from image 2 to image 3 to go from a lone parent family to a reconstituted family, and so on and so forth? Okay, have a think about that. Do that for me first, and then move on to number 3. Okay, number 3 is called organizational diversity, and this one is probably the most simple for us to really grasp because it's basically what we've been doing throughout all of these lessons. Rapoport and Rapoport said that we can no longer view the family just as the nuclear family, because for a long time, because that was the most common by far and other family types didn't really exist, for a long time the nuclear family was the only family people meant when they said family. Rapoport then said, actually, no, we need to change this. We need to recognize that there is different ways that families are organized. We've got same-sex families, we've got lone parent families, we've got reconstituted families, and so on and so forth. So all we mean by the term organizational diversity is there are different ways, diverse ways, in how a family is organized. It might be organized with one parent, two parents of opposite sex, two parents of the same sex. That's 3 different ways that families are organized. Okay, that's all this one is talking about, is different types of family exist. And I would like you to have a look at these pictures, and I'd like you to identify why there are more lone parent families, more same-sex families, and more reconstituted families than there have been in previous eras. And these pictures should give you some pretty clear answers as to why that is the case. So that's number 3, that's organizational diversity. Once you've done that, you can move on to number 4. Okay, so number 4 is generational diversity. Now, a generation is essentially an era. Okay, it's a time period in which people are born. So I am what is called a millennial. So I was born somewhere between 1985 and 1999, which makes me part of the generation of people who are now kind of in their late 20s, 30s kind of age group. Okay, millennials are the generation after what we call Gen X and before what we call Gen Z. Okay, so millennials might also be known as Gen Y, okay, Generation Y. So Gen Z are young people who are like digital natives. So they were brought up in a world where iPads, iPhones, Apple, Spotify, all of that was already in existence. I was brought up in a world where the iPhone and the iPad and the iPod were all released when I was a teenager. Okay, so we got used to it very quickly, but we didn't grow up with technology, whereas you guys are massively growing up with like smartphones, iPads, tablets, etc. That's just all part of the world that you've always known. So we obviously have very different experiences. Now, my parents had, you know, black and white TVs, and they remember the moon landing, and they remember the Queen's coronation. And my dad was like 6 years old when England won the World Cup in 1966. Like, they remember a completely different time to us. Of course they do. And so the way that they view the world is different to how I view the world, and the way that I view the world is different to how you view the world, because the world that we've been brought up in is different. And because the world that we've been brought up in is different to every generation, the way that we view the family is also different. Because the type of family we were brought up in changes from generation to generation. If you asked an older person, someone in their 70s, 80s, 90s, what they think the purpose of the family is, I would dare say it would be a different answer to what I would say the purpose of the family is. Because older generations often have much more traditional views about the family, much more traditional views about what family time should be like, whereas younger people tend to view friendships as equal or sometimes more important than family time. Okay, and that is something which is sort of evolving over time, and generations are changing what it means to be a family. So if you look at some of these differences, older generations, as I said, are more likely to value family time. They also, because they are obviously wealthier, they're more likely to own property and own a house, which obviously then influences their family in their sort of local area. They're more likely to have one partner for life, and they're also not always, and this is definitely changing over time, but those who are often against same-sex marriage and divorce tend to be older because they're a little bit more conservative and traditional in their views. Younger generations, such as millennials and you guys, Gen Z, are more likely to value time with friends and also to rent property with friends. They haven't got enough money to buy a house, so a lot of younger people rent a property with friends and sometimes make their friends their family. Maybe they've moved away from the family into the city and they're living with friends, and those friends are the ones that they spend Christmas with and Easter with and birthdays with and all those kind of key life moments, so their friends become their family. Younger people are also more likely to have multiple monogamous relationships. So basically to have one partner, then break up with them, have another partner, break up with them, and so on and so forth, rather than the same person for life. And younger people in general are more accepting of things like same-sex marriage, divorce, LGBT rights, etc., etc. Okay, so the different ways that we view the world affect the different ways that we view the family. So Rapoport basically saying here that families differ in terms of their attitudes towards the family based on the generation in which they were born. We can see this in these graphs. We can see the very, very top line on this graph is millennials, so people born 1981 or later. This is up to about 1999-ish. The next line is baby boomers. The next line is Gen X, and the line beneath them is the silent generation. So that is the oldest category we have on this graph. Okay. Now you can see very, very clearly that millennials in this graph are most supportive of same-sex marriage. They are the youngest generation and they are most supportive of same-sex marriage. The oldest generation, the silent generation, 1928 to 45, are the least supportive of same-sex marriage. So different generations have very, very different attitudes towards same-sex marriage and therefore towards that type of family. Moving on, we can also see attitudes towards divorce. So this shows that from 2000 to 2016, attitudes towards divorce have largely become more acceptable. So people are seeing divorce as more acceptable or less morally wrong over time. And this is maybe to do with the fact that people, generations are growing up, and more liberal, more kind of forward-thinking, more progressive generations are growing up in a world where they believe divorce is more acceptable than maybe their parents did or their grandparents did. So generational changes is changing how we see things like divorce. So there are big changes in terms of how different generations view the family. Okay, and the final one is social class diversity. Now, before we start this one, I want you to remember that working class families are not always poorer than middle class families. That is an unfair thing to say in general. However, due to the nature of things like jobs, different careers, incomes, etc., it is possible to say that working class families are usually or often or sometimes poorer than middle class families, but we can't say always. Okay, middle class families similarly are usually or often or sometimes wealthier than working class families, but again, not always the case. All right, now we're going to look at some of the facts behind differences between how different social classes often experience family life. And again, these are not one size fits all, but they're really, really helpful facts to see that different social classes have a different experience of the family. So working class families are more likely statistically to have more children than middle class families. So maybe middle class families might have 1 or 2 children, working class families might have 2 or 3 or more children. Okay, so that's just a sort of a stat that we can use to explain a difference in the two groups. Middle class families, on the other hand, are more likely to wait, or middle class couples, sorry, are more likely to wait to get married and have children later in life. So maybe they're a bit more focused on their career, and maybe they want to sort of earn more money sooner than having marriage and kids, and therefore they will maybe wait into their 30s until they're married, and in their 30s until they have children as well. So working class couples often have children sooner than middle class couples do. Working class families are also statistically more likely to live with or near extended relatives. This is often to do with things like childcare. It's cheap and easy to have, a sister or a brother, an auntie or an uncle looking after children, much more convenient. So therefore working class families are much more likely to stay in the same area that they grew up in and live near extended relatives. On the other hand, middle class families are more likely to move away from their parents and aunties and uncles and things, maybe into the city in search of a job, which means that middle class couples often raise their children many miles away from where their parents lived and where they themselves grew up. And that can often lead to them then often having to invest in childcare privately rather than being able to rely on extended relatives to look after children for them. So middle class families or middle class couples are more likely to move away from their parents and to have children later in life, whereas working class families and couples are more likely to live nearer their parents and have more children in the same area as their extended family. So that is just another example that Rapoport found of diversity between families, and this time based on social class. And that's it. That brings us to the end of this lesson. Well done for getting this far. Make sure you've got all the notes down for every single part of Rapoport and Rapoport's study. Make sure you've got all the different information for each part of their research, and I look forward to seeing what you've done. If you've got any questions, please ask. Thanks very much.